All right. Welcome, Holden. We're really happy to have you with us. I know you've been talking to everyone and their dog about everything going on with NIH cuts and funding. So we're really grateful that you're taking time to talk with the coalition today. We're trying to help our membership understand some of these issues, and the university has done a really good job in putting out information that speaks to the importance of NIH funding to the research mission of the university. And I was curious, though, to kind of go back in time a little bit and see if you could bring us up to speed on how did this partnership between the federal government and universities to drive science forward start?
Yeah, so if you go back to World War II,
Uh-huh.
before World War II, there was no significant federal research effort the way we think of it now. Research was done by universities, by individual professors, and the money mostly came from the university itself, but it wasn't very expensive to do back then. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't have giant machines and giant buildings and all the things that we have now that cost as much money as they do. But after the war, there's a famous paper written by a guy named Vannevar Bush who wrote something called "Science: The Endless Frontier." He was part of the Manhattan Project, and a lot of the big people at the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer and Vannevar Bush and Holly Compton and James Conant. Most of them went to go run universities. But so Holly Compton went to Washington University in St. Louis to be the chancellor, and Conant went to Harvard to be the president. And Vannevar Bush went to Washington to help set up the federally funded research effort. And the argument for it was that, first of all, we needed it because there were all these talented people who had gone off to war, all men then,
Mm-hmm.
who were going to come back. And the GI Bill is part of what came out of this whole thing.
Yep.
And then the idea was we needed a federally funded research effort. And even then, the argument for it was stuff that was politically useful. So the three things that Bush argued in his paper were the war on disease, because
Mm-hmm.
biomedical research has always, for 80 years, been the thing that did well in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Science in the national interest, which was defense, a strong defense, and
Uh-huh.
then science that drove the economy. Those were the three talking points in Bush's paper, Science: The Endless Frontier, and they're basically the same three we use now. And they're
Uh-huh.
probably the same three we're going to use to argue our way out of the situation that we're now in. And the big thing that had to get decided was, is the research going to be done at government facilities where government employees would do research, or would it be done by professors at universities? And Bush was strongly in favor of having professors at universities do it because he felt that curiosity driven research was the research that was most likely to succeed in producing the innovations that he was promising, which is borne out for sure, and that professors at universities would be much more independent in following their curiosity than if they were government employees who were directed to do so by people who worked for the government. And that was a big debate that was had at the time. He argued with somebody named Harley Kilgore, who was a senator who wanted the government to have a much stronger role in setting the research agenda. But Bush hung in there and eventually sold the idea that it should be done at the universities. The universities were initially reluctant to do it because they knew it was going to be expensive.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
and the buildings that they were going to have to build, and the administrators that it would take to administer the grants, and the compliance with various rules that they would have to do. They knew all that was going to cost a lot of money.
Mhm.
And so initially they said, we can't afford to provide the environment to do this. And that's where the idea of indirect costs, which are in the news now, came along.
I see.
And that began the social contract by which the universities and the federal government shared the costs of setting up the laboratories, and providing the support that it would take to fund the research. And I saw, I'm going to copy this from her, but I saw my friend Celine Gounder on the CBS News describing this. And the way to think of it is, if you're cooking, the direct costs are the salaries for the chef and the flour and the meat and the ingredients. But the indirect costs are the pots and the pans and the stove and the energy that it takes to power it.
Right.
And the university puts in a lot of the money that it takes to provide the infrastructure, but not all of it. The federal government has always put in a portion of it, and roughly it's about 50-50 on each side. And so if you were to pull out the what amounts to 70% of the uh, federal government's contribution, that would be a huge amount of money taken out all at once. And as much as, for Carolina, I don't know, I'm sure the Penny Gordon Larson has circulated the number, but it's
Uh,
north of $100 million, I would think.
Yes. I want to go back to a couple things that you talked about. Talked about curiosity-driven science and independence. And can you say a little more about why those things were important at the time, and I guess your opinion about now? I mean, do you see those as, it sounds like those were real bedrocks at this social contract that was eventually arrived at. So
Yeah.
why would those be particularly important?
Well, Bush was a visionary when it comes to this, and there's a statue of him not far from where I am now at the NSF headquarters, because he did this. And I've always been, the last few years I've been saying, it's kind of hard time to move on from Vannevar Bush. That's an 80-year-old model. We should probably update it. But now with all this going on, we're probably going to be hewing very close to him here for a while. Um, but yeah, so most great discoveries are discovered mostly by accident,
Can you give
or
us an
because,
example?
yeah. So a great one would be, um, the drug cisplatin, which anybody who has had cancer, who's watching this, or had a loved one, um, they they or their loved one might well have gotten a platinum drug. It's not a fun thing to do. It's a very cytotoxic agent. But I bet everybody watching this knows somebody who's been treated with that. And for some cancers, it is a is very curative. Um, so most pharmaceutical scientists wouldn't be working with platinum uh, to make a drug out of. But this guy, Barney Rosenberg, was trying to study the effect of electric fields on cell growth. And he
Mhm.
electrocuted a platinum electrode on top of a cell, and he saw these cells grow to be really, really large, which meant they weren't replicating. And when he figured out what was happening, platinum atoms from the electrode were going into the cell and forming a platinum drug that bound to nucleic acids and stopped them from dividing. And that is where all of the platinum drugs that people take for chemotherapy would come from.
So to keep
More,
those cancer cells from dividing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. He was not trying to invent a cancer drug. He was
Mhm.
trying to answer very basic questions about how cells grow and replicate. And he just happened to be using a platinum electrode to do it. Another more recent one would be, some people may have heard that we have a great new drug for HIV, which if you you can take, and it'll give you 6 months protection from HIV. And of course, UNC has one of the great HIV groups with
Mhm.
Mike Cohen and Dave Margolis and the late Charlie Vanderhorst.
Mhm.
Um, and uh, so this new drug, lenacapavir, is a drug that you can take one time, and it provides 6 months of protection from HIV. So it's almost as good as a vaccine, really, if you had
Yeah,
a
I
yearly
was just
vaccine.
thinking that. That's close.
Um, and um, and it works because of something in HIV called the capsid protein. And the person who described the capsid protein was a researcher at the University of Utah named Wes Sundquist. He was not looking for a drug. He was just studying the structure of the proteins in HIV, and that turned out to be a good drug target. And now we have that. I mean, I could rattle off a
Yeah.
lot of these. This is how most great discoveries and technical advances come to be. And Vannevar Bush believed that if professors were following their curiosity, this kind of thing would happen, and he was right. It's happened time and time again.
And what about the independence part?
Yeah, and so also the independence part is about the professors being able to follow their curiosity rather than being told, this is what you need to go find. And that is a crucially important thing in science, not just because uh, it leads to better innovations, because you end up looking for things that you might not have found if you went looking for them.
Yeah.
um, it's the age old thing of looking for your keys under the light post, because the light is there, rather than where they might be, which doesn't have a light on it. um, and So the independence part is crucial, because people will look in places that are harder to look in, but also because they'll work on things that may not directly be in the government's interest. Um, sometimes they do, because the government sets some of the parameters for the
Mhm.
funding. But science is better when people are looking at more different things,
Mhm.
uh, and have the ability to use their own curiosity and creativity to find it. And it's actually really bad when you get told to look for something, because then you might be more motivated to find it when it isn't there. And that
Mm.
leads to a lot of other problems that we have in the scientific enterprise.
Yeah. So research integrity questions and things like
For
that.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so over the years, I mean, all of these discoveries have happened. So much change has happened. Um, Positively, I mean, how did other countries sort of view this social contract? I mean, I suppose this was a new thing. It wasn't really this kind of social contract hadn't happened anywhere else.
Oh, it hadn't happened any many other places, um, but they all copied it.
They all
Lots of other
copied.
countries copied this after we did it. So,
Uh,
at the time, um, probably the best universities were in Germany,
mhm.
and obviously they had a huge amount of upheaval then. Um, and when those were rebuilt, and when Oxford and Cambridge evolved to become research universities, and then in Asia, as China began to develop its universities, and Japan, those all ended up gravitating toward the same model that had been set up in the United States,
So really,
because everybody believed that the U.S. had come up with the right model.
and those two key concepts of curiosity and independence permeated out then around the world.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
You hear often that, oh, other countries don't have American ingenuity or whatever. But they've managed to copy this and carry it out excellently. There's great research going on all around the world uh, according to these same principles. The journal that I'm responsible for, Science, is one of the most selective and highly cited in the world.
Mhm.
And about a third of our papers are US papers, and two-thirds are the rest of the world. So there's research from the rest of the world is highly competitive with US science.
And so, I mean, I guess there could be some people that would say, well, we did this for 80 years, and we're letting it go, or we're downsizing it a lot, or whatever it is, but it's okay because the rest of the world will take up the challenge and they have the same models. And so maybe it doesn't really matter. I mean, maybe it doesn't matter if we are exceptional in this space. I mean, what's your opinion there?
Well, that would be a striking thing for a country that has been obsessed with technology ever since the Industrial Revolution to do. I mean, why do you think we make such heroes out of these great technological innovators, despite their personal characteristics, and not just the ones we have now, but many from the past, Henry Ford and people like that? Why do we make such, and Thomas Edison, why do we make such national figures out of them? Because we're obsessed with technological advancement, and that technological advancement is fueled by basic science. So for us to say we're going to let the rest of the world have that would be completely counter to the history of the United States for the last 150 years. Um, so I think in the long run that won't happen. In the short run, if we let the rest of the world take up the mantle on this, they will. I
Mhm.
could easily fill my journal with papers from around the world that would be just as good as the ones that I take, even if if I left the U.S. out. I desperately don't want to do that because a lot of great science here, but there's enough great science going on around the world to provide a lot of scientific advancement. The question for the United States would be that the talent that produces that would all migrate out of the US, especially at a time when uh, there's pressure to have more people born in the US doing this kind of thing. Um, whether you agree with that or not, there's certainly political pressure for that.
Mhm.
Um, and so that talent is now going to go to Europe or Asia to do all this, and that's going to give uh, either our allies in Europe or our competitors in Asia
Mhm.
a leg up on in the business side of this whole thing. I mean, it seems like a long time ago because time is stretching out so long right now, but I think it was about 3 weeks ago when DeepSeek was introduced by China as a competitor to the US AI companies.
Right.
And there are two things about that are important. One is the part that got the most publicity, which is that they're able to do a lot of the same things that the US AI companies can do. But the other thing they did that was very shrewd was that they gave away the code for their LLM, which
Mhm.
undercut the value of a lot of the LLMs that were developed by entrepreneurs and companies in the US.
Mhm.
So this competition could be very detrimental to uh,
Economic.
to the U.S. economy. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, and I wonder, like, so if you have talent migrating away, that's talent that's already interested in science, right? Maybe they've been to university and they've done their undergraduate degree, but now they're looking for advanced degrees and the opportunities aren't there. The funding isn't there to support their continued education. But I wonder what happens to younger kids that, um, don't necessarily have the models in their backyard to look to. Um, does it, does it, is it a sort of dumbing down of the whole society?
Well, there are plenty of interesting things to do in the world besides science that are important. But
Indeed.
if your goal is to grow a technically sophisticated workforce in the United States, including in life sciences and things that are, like quantum computing that rely on serious physics, then yeah, you would like to develop those people in the U.S. and you would like to give young people who deserve the opportunity to do whatever they want in life to be able to choose science if they want to. And we already had a challenge with sort of stereotypes around science and people saying, these geeky guys and gals, can't get their, they don't have people skills, and the stuff I've heard my whole life. Um, uh, and that all of the, and we have a sitcom about scientists that basically makes fun of us, The Big Bang Theory, which is the most, which in some ways it tells people kind of a little bit about what our culture is like. But if you want to be a cool person, you don't watch that and go, yeah, I want to be like those folks. They're basically making fun of us. So there's already been this push that's always been in the US that, extroverted fast talkers are more prized in the society than people who look at data all day. And now you have an additional barrier for those folks wanting to be scientists. So yeah, that worries me a lot, and especially when we're competing with countries that do this exactly the opposite way around.
Yeah,
I mean, in India and China and places like that, getting into the Indian Institutes of Technology or being selected to go to Tsinghua or a place like that is the most prized thing in the whole culture.
right.
And so that makes it very, very difficult. And then, of course, you also have the fact that we have a lot of people who, because of their educational circumstances and the places where they live, don't have access to the kind of teaching for science that they deserve in the first place. So all of these things are adding up to uh, kind of bleak prospects for growing a scientific workforce in the United States.
And so in the NIH funding and federal funding from a number of agencies has really, that's been part of what they've done at the university level too, is, there's the support of labs and the parts of the kitchen, as you described it
Mhm.
earlier, but also there's support for scholars that maybe um, didn't have that education growing up, um, that are that are coming into the field in order to make sure that you are finding all of the talent that there is to find in these domains. Is that right?
That absolutely. And the way I think about this is it doesn't matter how you target the program. We want talented people in science no matter how we get them. So anything that we can do, whether it's targeted to people of a certain group or whether it's just supporting scientists in the lab who are in graduate school or what have you, all of those things are getting more people into science in America.
Mhm.
And we're in and so arguing over who should have access to these programs is counterproductive when I promise you, our competitors aren't having those kinds of arguments. They're trying
Right.
to get every talented person they can get by any mechanism they can to add to the national research effort.
So if I'm sort of thinking about this, so we are coming out, we came out of World War II. We had a lot of talented people able to go to college that hadn't been able to go maybe before. Um, and and during World War II, we had seen in some ways, some of the real difficulties of technology and what that brings and what science can bring us. And at the same time, enormous progress and maybe a hope for for a better society in so many different domains. And one of them is this idea of combating disease of all sorts, whether that be physical disease, mental health, all those sorts of things. And so we've had 80 years where we've done that. Um, and it feels like within weeks there is an effort to really throw that away. Um, what is, how would you, I mean, what would you say to kind of impress upon people what we're risking at the moment?
Yeah. So first of all, just to go back to one thing that you said that's always important when you talk about this, we think about nuclear weapons very differently now. At least I
Mhm.
do. I hope they're never used again.
Yeah,
But in 1945, the public support for the Manhattan Project and the use of the bomb to end the war in the Pacific was sky high. And people gave science a lot of credit for producing that. So that was the peak of when science was valued in the United States. And thankfully, we think about that differently now. But the Manhattan Project was viewed as a success
yes,
then for sure. But in terms of what we're putting at risk, uh, I think that I think that first of all, it's important, I think, and to separate two things. One is a lot of people are losing their job, a lot of people are scared, and they need you're the social worker, but they need support and love and compassion and acknowledgement of the pain that they're feeling and acknowledgement that it's uh makes sense to be pain and fearful right now. And
indeed.
my daughter got a social work degree and she taught me a bunch of different things. And I think you have a principle that says take 6 weeks to get over a crisis. So we're only 3 weeks.
Yeah.
What's that?
12.
12. Okay,
The
12.
crisis will
All
resolve within
right.
12 weeks. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So we're only on week 4, so we got a ways to go to get to 12 weeks. So helping people in this moment of crisis is crucially important. Um, we don't. I believe there will be a scientific enterprise in the United States on the other side of this. So we are seeing layoffs, and they're incredibly painful in the agencies. But so far, it's been about 10% of the workforce at the agencies. There are rumors that it could be greater, and that would be horrible. And it's still horrible to lose all that talent in the United States. But a year from now, will there be a scientific enterprise, and will we be able to adapt to the changes? You know, I'm optimistic, and I'm trying to help people process all this so that we'll be prepared to do that when the time comes. Um, but what is being risked is that we're going to have to reinvent all of that,
Yes.
and that's taking time away from all the important things that we could have been doing. um, and the trauma of having to go through all this for the scientific community. We're going to lose people. We're going to lose talent. We're losing programs that are very important to us in terms of things that we need to study that are important and that are driving people out of science potentially. Um,
I heard this
and
morning that they had cut
yeah,
the Alzheimer's Institute. I mean,
yeah, there were larger cuts to the Alzheimer's Institute that my old senator, Roy Blunt, when I used to live in Missouri,
mhm.
had championed. It sounded like they realized they overdid it there and they're trying to put that back together. But um, yeah, that's just a sign of kind of this wrecking ball approach that they're taking that is already creating stuff that they have to reverse. So again, all of this churn is
Keeps you from finding the next thing on the platinum
right.
ellipsis,
It's
right?
costing us. And the other thing we're seeing is having to relitigate things that we thought were settled.
Mm,
So there are still people who aren't convinced that vaccines
mm,
have no role in autism. All right. Well, I'm on the spectrum and I write about autism a lot. And I've learned a lot about this topic. And, the science is straightforward that there's an enormous amount of evidence supporting the idea that vaccines have no role in causing autism. Autism, everything we have is that it's genetic. Um, So there could be other things that aren't genetic that we'll find, but it's unlikely.
and we're
And
not going to find them if we're reinventing the wheel, right?
right, we're not going to find them if we're busy doing studies over that we've already done.
Hmm.
Right, and so a lot of what's being lost right now is is opportunity cost that is taking us away from other things like in Alzheimer's, since you brought that up, we spent a lot of time on the amyloid hypothesis that has produced some drugs that are helping, but we need to look at other things that are not in amyloid uh, for Alzheimer's, not because amyloid isn't important, but because we need to be doing lots of different things there.
Yeah,
So um, so we never want to be just looking at one approach to any problem.
yeah,
Um, so all of this is costing effort that could go into doing important things for even the disease things that the administration has been talking about. Putting more effort into chronic diseases. Nobody who's against that,
right.
but it's kind of hard to do that if you're busy redoing other things and dealing with all of this dislocation and wasted effort that is going into all of these changes. So I think I think a lot of people could agree that even if you feel some of this could be streamlined and more efficient, that you'd be better off implementing it with real conversations about what you can cut without losing things
Yeah,
instead of destroying a bunch of stuff and then, oh, whoops, we didn't mean to kill that. We're going to bring it back. That's a lot of
exactly.
wasted effort.
And I guess, I mean, just to bring it down to a very, kind of the person level, I mean, there are people that will not get treatments in time to save them. Um, in all likelihood, because things have to be started over, or the discovery just doesn't come soon enough. And that's a hard thing to necessarily prove, but I think maybe many of us have been there, hearing about a new treatment, having had a loved one that was lost to some illness, relatively recently, and thinking, gosh, if it had only been a year, if they could have lived another year, there would have been something to help them. And it seems to me that at its core, those are some of the things that we're really risking, is we're
Yeah, I
risking
mean,
people, we're risking well-being.
absolutely. And I mean, I think anybody who has been to an academic medical center or taken a loved one there, uh, the reason that academic medical centers are the best places for healthcare, especially for tertiary and quaternary care in the world, is because the physicians there, many of them, are also researchers who are studying the disease that they're practicing for. And if you take away the research part, they may not stay at those outstanding academic medical centers like UNC Healthcare.
Mhm.
And the whole model of academic medicine could get very upended. And anybody who lives in a place that doesn't have a major academic medical center in it um, is experiencing healthcare at a lower level of quality than they can get at their state's academic medical center. If you take it out of North Carolina, I've spent a lot of time at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. That is
Mm.
a superb place. Everybody in Alabama who gets cancer or has something serious happens to them wants to go to UAB, just like people in uh, across North Carolina want to come to Chapel Hill to get their health care at UNC. I mean, there's that plaque right there that says this is the North Carolina Memorial Hospital for the people of North Carolina.
Yeah.
And if you take
Yeah.
the research part of it away, you're not going to have that anymore, because that's why, like, why would, these places are very inconvenient. The parking is always terrible, and they're very crowded, and the buildings are all squished together. So you always wonder, why don't people just want to go to a hospital that has a better parking lot that's closer to their house? Well, they come to these very inconvenient places because that's where the best experts in the world are. And the funding from the federal government that supports the research is absolutely crucial in that.
Right. All right. Well, thank you. This has been a great conversation, and I'm glad personally to know a little bit more about the history of this and how all of this came to be, and just to take a minute to think about really what we're risking. And so, thank you.
Happy to do it, and thanks for all you do for Carolina. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.